Caleb stepped down from the driver's seat. He wasn't alone. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, climbed out too, their faces glowing with excitement. They pointed at my house, already discussing what color they would repaint it. They acted like it already belonged to them. Caleb smirked, a smug, victorious grin. He thought he had won. What he didn't know was that smile would be the last thing he'd ever wear inside this house. Welcome to Dad's Real-Life Revenge. I'm Arthur. Today I'm going to tell you a story that sounds too unbelievable to be real, but it happened right inside my own family, right in front of my eyes. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment with the name of the city you're listening from. This story will keep you hooked until the very last second. It's not just entertaining, it's also a warning about people who use sweet words and manipulation to turn families against themselves. I stood on the front porch. The Ohio evening wind swept across the yard, but I didn't feel cold. Inside me was a calmness so deep it was almost terrifying. A large moving truck roared into the driveway and stopped hard right in front of me, sending clouds of dust into the air. My son-in-law Caleb climbed out and walked toward me. He slapped my shoulder with the kind of fake confidence that dripped with arrogance. His father immediately started barking orders at the movers. "Don't scratch the hardwood floors," he said. I stayed silent. I watched their boxes being unloaded one by one. Greed was written all over their faces. They looked at me like I was just a helpless old man about to be thrown out of his own home. Behind the front door I could feel Grace trembling. My daughter was crying. She had no idea what her father had been preparing for all this time. I took a deep breath and slipped my hand into my jacket pocket. The note was still there. Cold, sharp, final. Caleb looked at me and said, "Today is a big day." "Yes, Caleb," I replied quietly. "A very big day. But not in the way you think. I had been preparing for this battle for a long time, and now the performance your family put on was finally coming to an end." To understand why Caleb had become so outrageously bold, we have to go back in time. 6 months earlier, Caleb and Grace's wedding looked like something out of a dream. Caleb showed up charming, polished, and full of sweet promises. He painted a picture of a bright future, talking about his high-level management position and his 6-figure salary. Back then I believed him. I smiled and gave my blessing to my daughter, never realizing I was welcoming a wolf into my home. Right after the honeymoon, Caleb's true colors began to show. He started calling this house our home, but the word "our" never included me. Caleb began rearranging the furniture in the living room without asking. He complained that my toolbox in the garage was taking up space meant for the luxury car he planned to buy. Bit by bit, he invaded my living space like a parasite feeding off its host. Things got even worse when Mr. and Mrs. Sterling started showing up. They weren't visiting their children. They were surveying territory. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen while they thought I was fast asleep. Caleb's mother said the master bedroom had the best view in the house and should belong to them. Mr. Sterling nodded in agreement and said I should be moved into the small basement room because it would be more convenient for me. They looked at my 35 years of hard work as if it were a free gift waiting to be claimed. Grace stayed silent. My daughter had become too weak against her husband's manipulation. Caleb always told her he was doing everything for the family's future. He painted fantasies of one big, happy family living together under the same roof, but in reality it was nothing more than a ruthless plan to take control of everything I owned. With every passing day, their shamelessness grew worse. They stopped asking my opinion about anything. They treated me like an unwanted guest in the very house that carried my name on the deed. What they never expected was that I wasn't the weak, forgetful old man they thought I was. While they were busy dividing up rooms in their heads, I had already begun a secret investigation of my own, and what I discovered about Caleb's past wasn't just a lie. It was a disgusting crime that could send him straight to prison. Dinner in this house slowly turned into a form of psychological torture. Caleb sat at the head of the table, the seat that had always belonged to me. He tapped his fork against his plate, the sharp clinking echoing through the room like a warning. Every word that came out of his mouth was soaked in poison. He constantly reminded everyone that I was getting old. He said managing a large estate like this was too much for a retired man. Mr. Sterling would smoothly follow his son's lead. He claimed that at my age people should relax in a small apartment somewhere peaceful. He painted pictures of a carefree life where I wouldn't have to worry about mowing lawns or shoveling snow anymore. They called it concern. But I saw the hunger in their eyes every time they looked at the marble walls around them. They wanted me out of sight so they could completely take over this house. Grace kept her head lowered toward her plate. I could see her hands trembling. My daughter was trapped between the father who loved her and the calculating husband controlling her life. Every time I tried to speak, Caleb would smoothly cut me off. He hid insults behind polished words and fake politeness. He looked down on the results of my 35 years of hard work. To him, I was nothing more than an obstacle standing in his way. The anger inside me kept building. It felt like molten lava flowing beneath a sheet of ice. I stared into Caleb's cunning eyes and wondered how someone like him had ever become part of my family. My silence only made them more confident. They thought I had surrendered. They thought I had accepted being pushed aside. Caleb even brought home brochures for luxury retirement communities. In the middle of dinner, he placed them right in front of me on the table. Then he calmly announced that he had already scheduled tours for me the following week. That was the moment I realized I could not step back any longer. They didn't just want my house. They wanted to strip away the last piece of my dignity. But Caleb had made one fatal mistake. He was so confident in his ability to manipulate people that he forgot something very important. I was the man who built this entire life with my own two hands. I was not going to be defeated by parasites living off my success. That night, after they all went to bed feeling victorious, I stayed alone in my office. I opened a hidden drawer and pulled out the stack of documents I had spent months collecting. Those papers were going to destroy the Sterling family's dream of wealth forever. Do you want to know who Caleb really was? Underneath that expensive suit and polished smile, the truth about his identity was horrifying enough to make your blood run cold. I began flipping through each page of the files under the dim glow of my desk lamp. What I saw made my blood boil. Caleb always bragged about earning a six-figure salary at a major financial firm. But the truth was far different. He had been fired 3 months earlier, and it wasn't because of layoffs. He was terminated for embezzlement. The records showed that Caleb had secretly siphoned money from client accounts to feed his gambling addiction. He was drowning in debt. Collection notices had been sent to a rented mailbox address. He deliberately kept hidden from Grace. Caleb was not a successful businessman. He was a desperate thief. And my house was the last lifeline he planned to cling to in order to escape financial ruin. I turned to the files about Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. They were no better. Their old house in another state had already been seized by the bank and put up for foreclosure. They hadn't come here to live together as one happy family. They came because they had nowhere else to go. That entire family was made up of professional scammers. Together they had staged the perfect performance right in front of my daughter. The betrayal was suffocating. I stared at Caleb and Grace's wedding photo sitting on my desk. Caleb's smile looked bright and warm, but his eyes were cold. He never loved Grace. He loved the numbers in my bank account. My daughter was nothing more than his ticket into a wealthy lifestyle. The shamelessness of the Sterling family went far beyond anything I could have imagined. They thought I was just an old man who could be bullied. They mistook my silence for fear. But they were wrong. I had spent my entire life building my business and protecting my family. I was not about to let a thief and his parasitic family destroy everything I had worked for. Every page I read felt like another nail being hammered into Caleb's coffin. I looked out the window. Dawn was beginning to break. And that was when a ruthless plan started forming in my mind. I wasn't going to throw them out immediately. No. I would let them believe victory was within reach. I would let them prepare for their own downfall with their own hands. But then I noticed one detail hidden deep inside Caleb's debt records, and it stopped me cold. It involved someone I trusted completely. Can you guess who Caleb's secret accomplice really was? That betrayal hurt far more than I was prepared for. That accomplice was my former financial manager. He had accepted bribes from Caleb to falsify my asset reports. The betrayal felt like a knife driven straight through my back, but that pain quickly hardened into cold determination. I picked up the phone and called my personal attorney. We had a lot of work to do that morning. I instructed my lawyer to make one final legal move. My entire estate, including the house, was immediately transferred into an irrevocable trust. Grace became the sole beneficiary. But there was one critical condition attached to it. The trust would be completely frozen the moment Caleb attempted any form of interference. Legally, the house no longer belonged to me anymore. It had become a fortress Caleb would never be able to touch. While the Sterling family kept dreaming about power and comfortably moved their belongings into my home, as if it already belonged to them. I quietly replaced the entire security system. Locksmiths came and went in silence while Caleb took Grace shopping. I prepared a small handwritten note. Only a few lines were written on it, but those words carried enough weight to crush every dream an artist had. I slipped the note into my coat pocket and felt a surge of strength run through my spine. Then I returned to the porch and sat down in my old rocking chair. I stared toward the front gate and waited. The Sterling family's moving truck was getting closer. They were bringing everything they owned here, convinced they were settling into a luxurious new life forever. Caleb stepped out of the truck looking like a king who had just conquered new territory. He walked toward me holding a stack of documents in his hand. He wanted me to sign the ownership transfer immediately. What he didn't know was that the trap had already been set, and I was the one holding the rope. Do you want to know what happens when a predator suddenly realizes he was nothing more than helpless prey all along? Caleb stepped onto the wooden porch with a smug expression stretched across his face. In his hand was a blue document folder. Behind him, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling stood with their arms crossed, staring at me like I was some tenant overdue on rent. Caleb cleared his throat, his voice dripping with fake generosity. Well, Arthur, I think it's time to make everything official, don't you? He held out the property transfer papers. He had even brought an expensive signing pen already uncapped and ready. Caleb claimed this arrangement would benefit everyone. He said he needed the house under his name to make business investments easier. He promised to take care of me for the rest of my life. Lies flowed out of his mouth so smoothly they sounded rehearsed. I looked directly into his eyes. Behind those polished glasses, I could see greed dancing wildly. He truly believed I would tremble with gratitude and sign away my home in exchange for a tiny room in the basement. Slowly I stood up, but I didn't take the pen. Instead, I calmly pulled a small folded note from my coat pocket. Then I glanced toward their moving truck, packed full of furniture and boxes, sitting proudly in my driveway. You really thought you were moving in here? I asked quietly. Caleb let out a sharp laugh. What are you talking about, Arthur? My family's belongings are already here. You're going to let us stay for the good of our future together, right? I raised the note in front of him. Silence swallowed the entire yard. The only sound left was the wind rustling through the trees. Caleb stared down at the paper. His smile slowly froze in place. He read the words once, then again. The color drained from his face. His skin shifted from furious red to ghostly white in seconds. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling stepped closer, curious about what could possibly shake him so badly. But the moment they read the note themselves, their confidence vanished too. Can you guess what was written on that small piece of paper that made all three of them go pale? Leave your prediction in the comments before I reveal the shocking truth. Caleb's arrogance collapsed instantly. He started stammering, unable to form complete words. The contract slipped from his trembling hand and fell onto the porch floor. I stared straight into the eyes of this con artist. For the first time I saw real fear taking hold of him. He finally realized he had made one critical mistake, and that mistake had cost him everything. What was written on that note wasn't just a warning. It was a death sentence for every plan the Sterling family had made to steal my life away. But what Caleb did next shocked even me. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize. Instead, he did something I never could have predicted. And in that single moment, the entire direction of that afternoon changed forever. Caleb stared blankly at the note in his hands. His lips trembled uncontrollably. I raised my voice and read every single word aloud, so the entire Sterling family and even the movers could hear it clearly. This house is no longer privately owned by me. It has been transferred into an irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary is Grace. Under the protection clause, anyone attempting to manipulate, seize, or unlawfully interfere with the property will be immediately removed by law enforcement. I paused for a moment and looked directly at the pale faces of Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. You are not welcome here, I continued coldly. Every lock in this house has been changed. The security system is directly connected to the local police department. If any of you step through that door, it will be considered unlawful trespassing. A deadly silence fell over the driveway. The movers exchanged nervous looks and slowly stopped unloading boxes from the truck. Suddenly, Caleb crumpled the fake transfer contract in his fist. The polite mask disappeared instantly. He exploded in rage, shouting that I had lost my mind. He screamed that I had no right to treat his family this way. Mrs. Sterling burst into dramatic tears. She wailed, that I was a cruel dictator with no heart. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, clearly trying to intimidate me physically. But I didn't move an inch. I pointed toward the moving truck, packed with their belongings. Take your garbage out of my driveway, right now. A deep sense of satisfaction surged through me. Watching the people who had once looked down on me stand frozen in humiliation was almost impossible to describe. Justice had finally arrived, delivered through razor-sharp legal documents. Caleb stared at the mansion he once believed was already his, but now it stood before him like an untouchable fortress. Still, Caleb refused to surrender. He slowly turned toward Grace, who was trembling behind me. Then he pulled out his final weapon. He believed he still had one last card left to play. He looked at his wife with eyes full of fake desperation, but underneath it was something far darker, a threat. Then Caleb prepared to reveal something about Grace that even I didn't know. A secret powerful enough to make the entire trust meaningless. At that moment, even I began wondering what kind of leverage Caleb still had over my daughter. Caleb locked his eyes on Grace and twisted his mouth into a crooked smile. He said that if he left, he would take the secret of the loans under her name with him. He threatened to destroy Grace's credit score and ruin her future. He thought dragging her down into the mud would scare me into surrendering. But Caleb had underestimated just how prepared I was. Before he could enjoy his little victory, I pulled out my phone. I played the recording I had secretly obtained from my former financial manager's office. In the recording, Caleb openly admitted to forging Grace's signature to secure illegal loans. His voice rang out clearly for everyone to hear. Greedy, vile, shameless. Caleb's face completely changed. In that instant, he realized he had just dug his own grave. Then I pulled out several envelopes filled with bank records and threw them at his feet. These are proof that you used my daughter's money to pay your gambling debts, I said loudly enough for the curious neighbors now staring from nearby yards to hear every word. At that moment, Caleb was no longer a successful businessman. He was nothing more than a con artist being exposed in broad daylight. The Sterling family's lies were completely stripped apart beneath the afternoon sun. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling desperately tried to defend their son. They accused me of making everything up. But the moment I revealed photographs of Caleb meeting with loan sharks, both of them fell silent. Shame spread across their faces like poison. The movers immediately began loading the furniture back onto the truck. They had nothing to do with a family drowning in criminal behavior. Caleb suddenly looked small, weak, broken. He collapsed onto the lawn and started mumbling fake apologies. He swore he would change. He begged Grace to give him one last chance. Watching the man who once acted so superior now crawling at our feet, I felt no pity at all, only disgust. But the most important moment that day was not Caleb's downfall. It was Grace's reaction. My daughter slowly stepped out from behind me. She picked up the stack of documents filled with lies and fraud. A suffocating silence stretched across the driveway. Grace stared at her husband as though she were looking at a dangerous stranger she had never truly known. I was terrified she might still fall for his crocodile tears. I feared years of manipulation would make her weak at the worst possible moment. But then Grace did something that left even me speechless. Grace stood there staring down at Caleb. The weakness in her eyes was gone. She grabbed the stack of fraudulent documents and hurled them straight at him. Papers scattered wildly through the evening wind. Then Grace spoke, her voice hoarse but unwavering. "You never loved me. You only loved this house and my father's money." Caleb reached for her hand, but Grace stepped back immediately. She announced that she would be filing for divorce at once. At last she had seen the truth hiding beneath her husband's polished mask. In that moment, Caleb realized he had lost everything. No mansion, no gentle wife left to manipulate. Nothing. He turned toward his parents. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling now looked like two frightened old people standing beside a moving truck full of belongings, with nowhere left to unload them. The movers slammed the truck doors shut and demanded payment immediately, threatening to dump every box onto the sidewalk if Caleb couldn't pay. He frantically searched through his pockets, only to pull out overdue bills and debt notices. In humiliation, he stripped the expensive watch off his wrist and handed it over as payment. Then the moving truck slowly pulled away, while the entire neighborhood watched in silence. The Sterling family dragged a few small suitcases behind them as they walked out of my driveway. They had nowhere left to go except a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the worst part of the city. That was all Caleb could afford with the scraps of money he had left. The contrast between the luxurious mansion he almost possessed and the miserable life now waiting for him was enough to drive him insane. Before disappearing down the road, Caleb turned back one last time and stared at the house with eyes filled with hatred and helpless rage. Grace collapsed against my shoulder and cried. But those were not tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of freedom. Together we stood on the porch and watched the greedy family disappear into the distance. Poetic justice had finally been served. The people who tried to steal another man's home ended up without a real home of their own. But the story did not truly end there. Later that night, while cleaning my office, I discovered an old letter wedged beneath the back of a drawer. It had been sent years earlier by an old friend of mine from a law office. The moment I read it, my heart tightened. There was something about Caleb's mother that I had completely overlooked. A truth so dangerous it could destroy the entire legal strategy I had worked so hard to build. I held the letter in my hand. My fingers trembled slightly, but then slowly I tore it into tiny pieces. I tossed them into the fireplace. The flames rose and consumed the final secret. Whatever the past may have been, Grace's future was the only thing that mattered to me now. I would never allow another shadow to haunt my daughter's life again. 6 months passed quickly. My home was now filled with light and peace. No more tense dinners. No more poisonous remarks whispered across the table. Grace had finally found herself again. Her divorce was finalized, and she was managing the trust with remarkable confidence. Seeing her genuine smile return was the greatest reward I could ever ask for. Caleb and the Sterling family completely disappeared from our lives. I heard they were struggling in a rundown apartment while drowning under massive debt. That was the price of endless greed. I felt no regret for being ruthless when it mattered. Sometimes kindness needs sharp edges to protect the people we love. As fathers, we protect our children even when they do not yet realize they need protection. I stood once more on the front porch where 6 months earlier I had faced down a pack of wolves. I took a deep breath of the fresh Ohio air. I had defended my fortress. I had protected my daughter's happiness. That freedom was priceless. If you have ever dealt with greedy relatives or a toxic relationship, share your story in the comments below. Send this video to fathers and daughters who need the strength to stand up for themselves. Dad's real-life revenge thanks you for listening. Stay strong. I smiled and stepped back into the house. The front door closed firmly behind me. A new chapter of our lives had officially begun. But remember one thing. Never underestimate the silence of a father, because behind that silence lives a love without limits.